was chilly February of 2006 at campsite 30 in Rock Creek, just south of Sulphur. And it's a one-way park. When you pull in, you have to access your campsites in a one-way fashion, so you can't turn your vehicle around. So the back of my truck was towards Rock Creek, and there's the campsite off to my right side. I had set my tent up, set a table full of food like grapes and melons and things like that, and peanut butters, and I even opened a bag of Cheetos and just things. I taped up some blankets over my windows, and I had an opening over my steering wheel and at the corners where I could open them up and look outside. But my thought was that if something was to peer at my truck through the woods, I did not want them to see my head, my profile, or me even moving around in the truck. It had to appear empty. So that's what I did. I set it up, and 7:30, I had previously taped a parabolic microphone on the top of my truck so that all I had to do was just lay back with my headsets on and just listen. And everybody knows with parabolics, I mean, you can hear anything.
So I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and I hear footsteps coming up behind me. And he gets right up behind the Blazer and stops. Then just a couple of seconds later, you hear another one walk up. And then after that, a third one walks up, and they're all standing there behind the Blazer. And I'm sitting there listening, thinking, where are they at? I know that they stopped right behind the Blazer. So I'm listening, and all of a sudden you hear what sounds like a fingernail reach over and tap the bowl on my parabolic, and it sounds like a shotgun going off in my ear. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of freaking out because I know they're right there behind me, but I can't look out because I got the blankets over the windows. So I take the one that I'm sitting at, which is the back driver's passenger seat, and I lower it down, and I'm kind of waiting for him to walk around because I have my camcorder there. As I'm sitting there, I notice there's 3 or 4 things going across the field, and at first I thought it was like maybe some dogs or some wild pigs or something, and they were going across in 4x4 mode. Well, when they got to the tree line about 150 feet away from me, they stood up and walked in on 2 feet, and that was when I realized, did I just see what I thought I saw?
Crunch, crunch, and I start paying attention because I don't know where it's at. I just know I'm hearing it. I'm like, okay, I'm hearing something walking for the first time, and it's crunch, crunch, and all of these campsites are separated by rock paths with gravel on them, so very gravelly paths in between the campsites, and I hear whenever it breaks from the leaves, and I don't hear the footsteps anymore, I hear something dragging through the gravel. Sounds like a stick dragging through the gravel. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's no beavers here? I mean, I'm sure there are beavers here, but would a beaver be walking through the camp dragging a stick? Could it be a muskrat? I'm trying to play through my head what would be dragging a stick that I'm hearing. And then it would go back into the leaves, and you would hear footsteps through the crunch, crunch, crunch. And then even though the gravel dragging, I thought it was a stick, I didn't know for sure until all of a sudden I hear ping. Something hits one of the metal posts that's in one of these campsites. Each campsite has a metal post for hanging lanterns or trash or whatever. And I hear walking. 15 seconds later, I hear another ping. Ping! So I realized that with the cadence of the pings, and I think a third one, that every 15, 20 seconds I'm hearing another ping. It means it's moving from campsite to campsite, and it's tapping these posts as it goes. So I'm putting a mental picture together as I'm laying there in the dark of how this thing is traveling. And then I hear a trash can lid pop open and get put back on. It doesn't fall to the ground. And I've heard plenty of raccoons nose these lids off, and they hit the ground and roll, and, and then they stop. So there's a distinct difference of when a raccoon pops open a trash can lid and when a human thingy pops open a trash can lid and puts it back on. And at this point, I am absolutely certain there's either a person or a Bigfoot in this park.
So I'm sitting there, and probably 30 seconds to a minute later, here comes a second group. Same thing, on all fours. They get to the tree line, they stand up and walk right in.
Wow, so do you think they move faster on all fours? Is that what they were trying to do?
Well, I mean, when you think about it, they're going across a field. Why not get down on all fours? Most people would just look out there and say, oh, that's just a bear or, a cow or something going across the field.
Yeah.
So that may be just one of their ways that they keep hidden when they have to go across a big field.
That makes sense. I mean, they may look more like a bear until they get to the woods and stand up, start walking in there.
So, here the first 2 groups went by, here come a third group. And same thing, when they got to that tree line, stood up, walked in. So I'm sitting there listening, and I can hear them as they're coming down through the woods along the creek back behind me. And once they get past behind me, one of the ones behind me turns around and walks off. Then the second one turns around and walks off. And then the third one walks off.
Wow.
And by this time, I'm so totally freaked out that I'm like, I ain't getting out until it's daylight.
Absolutely not.
You know, I'm a firefighter. I am trained to pay attention and those type of things. And I was trying to take in and absorb everything that was happening. This thing is meandering through the park, popping metal posts with this stick. It's got a stick in its hand. It's checking trash cans. And not until last night did I realize that it probably was the young one, not the big one. When it finally makes its way around close to my camp, I hear it stop. For the first time, it stops moving. And I'm like, okay, it knows I'm here. It's now looking at my campsite. Somewhere it's out there looking at my campsite. And I hear it inch forward and then stop. Even for up to 30 seconds to a minute. And then you'll hear it inch forward and stop. And that's when you get a little wigged out, because you're like, it is inching closer to my campsite. And so at that point, I open up my thing and I'm looking in my mirror. And because I'm thinking it's behind me somewhere, because that's where my microphone was pointed, in that direction, and that was where it was the loudest. So I'm like, it's back there somewhere.
Well, so how many you figure you saw? Like,
I'm figuring roughly there's 10 to 12 going across the field, and then the 3 behind me.
wow.
And we know this area has a family clan in it.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking that I've probably seen the whole clan out foraging for food.
Yeah. Did you get any good up close looks at a face or anything?
No, it was
Dark.
It was dark, half moon, you know.
Yeah.
Through my mirror, I saw an animal, walking like this. When it got to my truck, and there was a smaller one behind it, I saw them. It was almost like they were jockeying for position to get to my truck as fast as possible, and they were bumping into each other. And but that's the only time I saw the small one. I never saw the small one again. When it got to the back corner of my truck, as much as you would think, well, that's when you better start staring and see what's going on, that's when I became the most panicked. It grabbed the racks on my truck and stepped around my truck. And if the camera was the mirror that I was viewing this thing in, I thought it was coming down the side of the truck. And that's when I was the most terrified, because I saw how big it was at that point.
But when they stood up, and we went and measured where they stood up at, and on average, it was about 8 feet tall.
Wow.
And of course, we also took photographs of where the grass was trumped down, where when they walked into the woods, they trumped the grass down.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll admit it took me about 1.5 years before I went back into that field, because it really shook me up.
Wow.
When I saw it walking, I didn't get a good size reference, but when it stood up next to my truck and the racks hit it right here, and my racks are 7 foot tall, the size reference frightened me the most. I saw hair on its shoulders, the hands wrap around the post, and I thought it was coming down the side. And I didn't even realize if I'd even locked my doors. I didn't even know I needed to lock my doors, but at that moment, all I could worry about are my doors locked. But I didn't want to make a noise. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to make a sound. I was convinced that they did not know I was in my truck. Well, they couldn't have known I was in my truck, because they come right to my truck. I know that at one point, as he was coming up to the corner of my truck, I think I got a reference of him being concerned about my tent, and being the reason why he was at that corner of my truck was because the tent was in that direction. They have to know that tents are where we are at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night in a campground, and they know that. So I'm absolutely convinced that is the only time I've ever been able to trick a Bigfoot and having a sighting. But what happened next? I actually let my blankets close as I thought he was coming down, because I knew that if he just looked into my window and it was dark, that it would just look like tinted windows and he wouldn't see anything. So I just let my blankets close really easy, and I actually went into like a bit of a impromptu submissive. I was like, what am I gonna do? You know, they can tear the door off if we wanted to. And I noticed, I could see my shirt going boom, 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 boom with my heartbeat. I mean, my adrenaline was flowing like you wouldn't believe. Fight or flight was kicking in. And I remember thinking, he's touching the metal on my truck. He's gonna feel my heartbeat. And I actually pulled my back off the seat so he wouldn't feel my heartbeat through the metal, because I did not want him to know I was in there. But immediately the back end of my truck squatted down where it had climbed up on my bumper. So, I actually felt a little less panicked, because I now knew where he was. He was on the back of the truck, and it was the ass end of my truck squatted 4 to 6 inches. I mean, it really squatted. This thing was up on the bumper.
Of course, we've also had grass balls thrown at us in the field, just not too far from that same location.
Really?
Lots of vocalizations, rock throwing, rock clacking, and I mean, it's a pretty active area.
And I heard them rifling through the stuff in my truck. I had a generator back there that the next day I saw was turned completely over. Other stuff was jostled around. And I had 2 little propane tanks in the back corner. While they were moving stuff around, and all I could do was just sit there and listen. They were moving stuff around. They accidentally clinked the 2 little tanks together, and they went clink, and they stopped. And I heard clink, 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 like they were toying with these 2 little canisters, 1 pound propanes. And you know, they messed around a little bit longer, and they eventually stopped. And I was hoping that they would come around to the front of my truck, because I had positioned my blankets to where I could open them over the steering wheel. I had a video recorder in my hand, but I didn't step out. I kicked myself in the butt for not stepping out. But I was convinced that because they were investigating my campsite, that they would eventually end up in the front of my truck. And that's when I was just going to hit my headlights and film them through the windshield.
Yeah.
And I was going to get the world's greatest video of 2 Bigfoots. They never did come to the front. They eventually drifted off and moved off. But I was sure that they were in the woods somewhere around my campsite, and so I never got out of the truck. I just sat there till daylight. But at some point, I did hear off in the distance more metal tapping, ding, ding, but only till in the morning did I realize that it was no longer them tapping the post, but clanging my tanks together. My tanks were gone.
So they stole
They
your
stole
tank.
the 2 tanks.
Wow.
And we're off in the distance, and I heard ting, ting, and I thought it was them hitting more posts, but it was my tanks.
So they liked the sound of it.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Wow. That's incredible.
Most of our researchers have their own little research areas. Me personally, I've got over 8 different areas in Adair County.
Adair County.
And we've been tracking a white Bigfoot since '96.
Wow.
And we've seen him on a couple occasions, but it's always been far enough that the flash ain't going to catch him, you know, from the camera and stuff
And that's
like that.
and that's part of the big problem with catching these on film is because it's usually at night.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's usually at night when you see him. The rare instance that you do see him in the daytime, it's just pure luck, and usually you don't have a camera because you're thinking, well, you know, we're not going to run anything around here. But most of our researchers in the MABRC, they do have their own areas close to their homes and stuff. But Hanobi, we've been coming down here. Randy's been down here for going on probably 8 years.
Wow.
So we started bringing in other researchers from across the country to come in here with us, and hopefully they'll experience the same thing we've experienced here. So it gives credibility to what has happened to us when other researchers have the same thing happen to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was very, very surreal, and I, not a day goes by. I mean, not a day goes by that I don't have in some shape or form a thought of something that happened that night. And
I bet.
could I have done something different? Should I have stepped out? Would I have a video? Those kind of things. I mean, you can never get that night back again, but I still relive it every day.